I'm Sharon Hearle from Butterfly Conservation. I'm the regional manager covering the east of England. And this afternoon, I'm going to talk to you about the importance of bare ground for a selection of butterflies and moths in the Brecks. So the first slide indicates that this is part of a national lottery project called Back from the Brink, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. And the project I'm referring to is the Shifting Sands one in the Brecks. And we're working with a whole host of partners. I'm a small part of a partnership with Plant Life, Forestry England, Bug Life, and of course Natural England. And there are others. So this slide here just shows you where the Brecks are, the Brecks of Norfolk and Suffolk, 400 square miles, and the driest part of the United Kingdom, which sets it apart. The other dots on the map show the location of some of the other Back from the Brink projects, which are also running. So what makes Breckland special? It's, as I've said, one of the driest areas of the UK and home to an incredible number of species, 12,845 plus can be found here. We've got 55 sites of special scientific interest, and some of these sites are huge big heathlands across the landscape. And 28% of all the UK priority species live here, and that's looking at not just the butterflies and moths, but the bugs and plants and all sorts of other creatures. And 72 are only found in the Brecks, so that makes it even more special and an area that's important to conserve. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about the importance of bare ground for a selection of moths and butterflies. And these are the ones I'm going to refer to: lunar yellow underwing, grey carpet, the Baseltime Casebearer, which is a micromoth, Dinghy Skipper butterfly, a forester moth, and the grayling. And they've all got something slightly different to tell us about the Brecks and also bare ground. So lots of different habitats in the Brecks. This is a slide that shows sort of heather heathland and lichens, and it's with the coniferous forest in the background. That's one type of habitat you can see there. But also the Brecks was famous as an area of inland dunes, inland sand dunes that have of course stabilised over the years. I think the last sort of blowing sand was back in probably in the 1940s, when the sand actually blew around. Now there's just these odd sort of bare patches like this, or not often do you find much bigger areas of actually open sand that's been blown around. It's been stabilised. We've had agriculture on the open Breck sites, and of course forestry. The vast Thetford forest has been planted across most of the Brecks. A Breck itself means it was a disturbed field. It was a field that was cultivated for a short period of time until the nutrients ran out, and then it was abandoned. Of course, nowadays the arable part of the Brecks isn't abandoned anymore. With irrigation and with modern fertilizers, they crop it all year round. So rabbits, in order to get bare ground in the Brecks, now that the wind isn't blowing the sand around and everything's starting to stabilize, we're left with a few other things that are creating the bare ground, which is so important for the species I'm going to talk about later on, and many of the other priority ones. Rabbits. Rabbits, in the Brecks there were and there still are huge numbers of rabbits, and they are incredible landscape engineers. And you can see these two slides that that Pip has provided me with show the difference that you can get with high rabbit density and then of course low rabbit density. And this difference in all these little niches, all these little opportunities for creatures to live in make all the difference to many of our species. Rabbits, unfortunately, have hit a bit of a rough patch with viruses, and they are in need of our help. And that is something that Shifting Sands have been doing to find ways of encouraging. It sounds hard to believe, doesn't it, with rabbits, but they have needed to find ways to encourage the rabbits to do a lot better. Because if we've got rabbits, then we've got things like moles will move in, and then everything starts to work a lot better. They keep the Brecks open and bare for us, so they can be a really good thing. This slide here shows Foxhole Heath in the Brecks. So the Brecks is covered in these huge warrens. These warrens were big business in their time, and it was one of the main sources of the economy, was sending rabbits, rabbit skins, rabbit meat into London on the train in some cases. So big business, big rabbit warrens. And this one here is Foxhole Heath, which was windblown sand, now rabbit warrens and molehills and sheep grazing. And it is, together with Wheating Heath in the Brecks, probably the best classic site I know of for Lunar Yellow Underwing moth that I'm going to talk about. It's also very good for the stone curlew. And there you can see sort of a typical Breckland heath, if you like. There's a bit of bare sand there from a rabbit burrow, lovely tufts of fine grasses, and with all the lichens in between. And this is just what our moth likes. So that brings me on to the first specialist I'm going to talk about, which is the lunar yellow underwing. Here it is. It's an adult that's flying now. It's on the wing between July and September, although it is one of these moths that has a rest in the summer months, so it can have a rest in August and then fly again later on in September. The larvae, the caterpillar here, as you can see, very distinctive, and they are caterpillars throughout the winter, from November right through till March, and they'll be feeding on the fine grasses. And the survey method, let me go to this one first. So this map here shows the distribution of the lunar yellow underwing, and it's from the new Atlas of Britain and Ireland's larger moths by Butterfly Conservation. So all up-to-date stuff. And you can see on this map that the east of England really does have the stronghold for lunar yellow underwing, and in particular the Brecks. This moth is quite a powerful flyer, so we do find it outside the Brecks now and again, and we also get it along the coast. But the Brecks is a real stronghold for it, and it's where it does best. For lunar yellow underwing, we really have benefited from detailed studies that were done by the late Jerry Haggart for 10 years or more. He studied this particular species. He worked out the habitat preferences. He studied the larvae in detail. All 7 instars were described, and undertook surveys right across Norfolk and Suffolk. It assessed the impact of habitat management. So it is from Jerry's work that we understood that sheep grazing alone was not great for this moth, and a whole host of other things were really important. And his work has really set the scene for a lot of work in the Brecks that's followed on from that, and informed our species fact sheet, which we've got available if anyone wants to get a copy of that later on. So Blackfoot Forest has occupied much of the Brecks now, but lunar yellow underwing can take advantage of some parts of that process. So this particular slide shows a track and some restock, and in some cases the moth has exploited this as a temporary habitat. It can use the edges of the tracks where it's not too trampled. So when I say use, I mean the caterpillars can use the grass, the fine grass tufts along the edge of the track. And it can also use the restock where the young trees have all been planted in rows, you can see in this slide, for a short period of time before the vegetation gets going. Fine grasses can persist in this habitat, and then the moth can make use of that. As soon as the forest develops, though, that it's the end of occupation for the lunar yellow underwing in this location. It soon becomes tall forest, which of course it can be for 60 plus years, and then that habitat is unavailable to the moth again. So this slide here shows some of the threats to the moth in the Brecks. Scrub invasion and rank grassland is not good news for this moth. The dog here, my dog, the Jack Russell, kind of shows this kind of more rank grassland, and that kind of habitat is not suitable for the caterpillar, and hence it's not suitable for the moth to survive. As soon as this type of habitat sets in, then we find we lose the lunar yellow underwing. So I said a lot really about the caterpillar, because essentially that's what we, in terms of looking for this moth, that tends to be what we do. So if you can see the slide that shows these nice little tufts of fine grasses surrounded by bare soil, this is what the moth likes and what the caterpillar needs in order to feed up and survive the whole winter. You can find the adult. It does come to light occasionally, not in large numbers, but it will come. And it does particularly like wine ropes around about September time. So that's another way of surveying for it. And occasionally I've seen them just by walking through Breck Heaths, but I have to say that's quite rare. And in order to really get to know this particular species, it's nighttime surveys with torches, sometime between March and March, usually December, because that's when the caterpillars are just about big enough to see, but not so big that there aren't many of them to find. So that's what, so we, the other advantage of surveying for this particular species at night is because we've got stone curlews on many of the suitable sites for this species in the day, in the flight season, and obviously we don't want to disturb the birds, so hence nighttime surveys are a good way of doing it. And we can get some quite good numbers of these larvae in 30 minutes. Two people can count sort of 30 odd on a good site, 30 odd caterpillars in 30 minutes, and that gives us a good idea of the site doing well. You see these little tufts here, the caterpillar sits on the tops of the old seed heads, and that's what we're looking for at night with the torches, and we can pick that out quite well. If we had lots of sheep grazing this, then you don't get those high, those tall seed heads, and you don't tend to get high numbers of this moth. So to get this kind of habitat where perhaps we haven't got rabbits grazing, you don't tend to get lots of rabbits in the forest as such. So by creating these, I don't know if you can see in this slide, there's a big swirl of bare ground that's been created by a machine with a harrow, and that has created just the right conditions for this moth. At the moment it looks quite bare, but small tufts of fine grasses will develop just perfect for the moth. and that can be done quite simply with a tractor and a harrow. At the same site, we also mow, or Forestry England, I should say, do this. They mow strips, so you end up with a fabulous mosaic of bare ground, mown grass, and long grass, and it really does work a treat for our Brecks species. So I'm going to switch now onto another one, a completely different species, completely different habitat, but still needs bare ground and is still found in the Brecks. So the grey carpet is only found in the Brecks, essentially. It is a moth that can turn up just occasionally in Cambridgeshire, other parts of Norfolk, and one or two sightings in Lincolnshire, but essentially it's in the Brecks. It's associated with flicksweed, which is in, you can see that's the plant that's in these two photographs. And the moth itself is a grey, a silvery grey moth. It's quite difficult to confuse it with anything else. And it thrives on cultivated arable margins and field edges, and it needs annual cultivation for it to thrive. You do it 1 year, the following year the plant is much diminished, and then the third year it's gone. We've also discovered that if you cultivate the same site year after year after year, it also diminishes in time as well. So arable margins are the best place for this. And in fact, last year we had one arable margin, a farmer reported 90 odd. So when it works well, this moth is really quite numerous. The slide, the big picture there was just a grassy ride next to King's Forest in Suffolk. Forest ride, it was just rank grassland. We rotivated it, a tractor and a rotivator, did a couple of passes across this. So it was a rough sort of rotivation. There was still quite a bit of grass in there, but nevertheless, it was a sea of flicksweed here, and it worked a treat for grey carpet. In terms of looking for grey carpet, so it's May to early June, so this season is now over. It only flies once a year. It flies during the day, so it's quite easy to come across if you're in the vicinity of its food plant. So that doesn't necessarily persist, as I've said, in the same place every year. So it's first, to locate this particular moth, you need to know where flicksweed is doing well, and then search for it during the day, in dry weather. It doesn't have to necessarily be sunny weather, but certainly dry weather between May and June. Occasionally comes to light traps, not that often, but it does occasionally come to light traps. But you're not going to get the 90 odd you can see on a good site. If you miss the adult, there's a chance to look for caterpillars, which are quite distinctive on flicksweed, and they can be found from June through to early July. On sites with grey carpet, on these cultivated arable margins, so what I mean by those, I don't mean grass margins, because you don't get any flicksweed in grass margins, and I don't mean margins with pollinators, especially sown pollinators. I mean cultivated arable margins that are just left bare, which work really well in the Brecks. And in those, you often get these other stunning moths, which is the marble clover and the broad-bordered beehawk moth, which also fly during the day, and they're often found on the same sites. Okay, so I'm now switching to yet another moth. I'm going small this time. This is a micromoth, the Baseltime Casebearer moth, which is only found in the Brecks, and only on a handful of sites in the Brecks as well. So it's probably the rarest one there is. About a centimetre. This slide here is quite deceptive. They really are quite small, a centimetre. And I think the chances of finding one of these are really quite small. They tend to swarm, and you tend to get really good days, and 1 or 2 people have been exceptionally lucky and found them. But generally, you don't see them. We don't see them because they're very, very tiny. And Baseltime is also very small and of limited distribution in the Brecks as well. It's another one that comes up after disturbance, so it's a plant that cannot compete with grass, with thickets of grass. It needs annual disturbance. That can just be a harrow going across the ground, just to loosen up, just to break up the grass sward, and then the Baseltime can do quite well. And here we have, this is one of the Shifting Sands, one of the projects as part of Shifting Sands is to create, to widen and create these new corridors in the forest. They're up to 40 meters wide, and to open them up as big, wide, open corridors with disturbed ground. So that's been done. That was done last winter. And this is a slide that I took a few weeks ago, last week even. And you can see already we're starting to see lots of plenty of bare ground, which is great. And also some of the first plants starting to show along the edge. And in the foreground is Baseltime. In this case, it's the white flowered variety. And interesting, I don't know why, but all of the plants along here were white, although elsewhere in the Brecks, it's sort of a purple, pink colour. So I'm really, really hopeful that as this project develops along these rides, as disturbance is maintained on an annual basis, we'll see this plant spread across this wide corridor, which was formerly forest crop and formerly quite dense grass thickets. So once it's broken up like it is in this slide with stones and bare sand, this little plant will thrive and the moth will find it. The moth is very good. It's amazing, I don't know how, but it does seem to find these plants, and I'm sure it will find this corridor and establish a new colony here, which will be brilliant. So a little bit more about the detail of the Baseltime Casebearer moth. It lives as a caterpillar in a case. So here is a case in this particular image. And although it starts on Baseltime and the egg is laid on the flower, and then it uses the old case for the caterpillar to live in. So in that image, inside there is a caterpillar, a bit like a hermit crab, if you like, and it uses the case for protection whilst it's feeding on grass. So in its environment, it needs not only Baseltime, but it needs fine grasses, and it will move around using this case to feed on the grass, and potentially over a couple of years, if need be. So this is another one that needs a very specialised type of habitat. It's also one that doesn't do very well with rabbits. So although rabbits are great for for the lunar yellow underwing that I spoke about earlier, for the Baseltime Casebearer, they're not good news because they do seem to favour eating Baseltime, and then hence it doesn't do very well for this moth. The moth won't cope too well with mowing, and it won't cope very well with sheep grazing. So it does need particular habitat management care for it to thrive. It does very well on the forest corridors in the Brecks, and Forestry England have done an excellent job of managing rides for this particular moth where it does occur. So this slide again with the dog for scale, shows a ride in one of the parts of the forest, and you can see how thick the grass is if it's left to its own devices. But simply by running a harrow through and breaking it up, that's enough for Baseltime to set seed and grow, and for the moth to complete its life cycle, and then rotivate a different section another year to start the process all over again. And the moth has done well in this situation for easily 10 plus years now. So this we know this works well. Okay, so now I'm going on to a butterfly. So Dinghy Skipper isn't as restricted both nationally nor in the eastern region as that previous moth I talked about was, which has really got, I think Baseltime was almost only about 4 or 5 sites. Dinghy Skipper is much more widespread. But of course it's a butterfly that is much more likely to see, so it's great for the public. You've got a chance of finding this butterfly and being able to see it. It's on the wing in May and early June, and it also depends on a degree of bare ground. The caterpillar feeds on bird's foot trefoil, also horseshoe vetch, but bird's foot trefoil is probably the main plant. And as you can see here, it's in a kind of a broken up sward. As soon as grass gets too thick or a forest crop grows up, both bird's foot trefoil and the Dinghy Skipper will disappear. So it is another one that depends on a degree of bare ground and that kind of management. The caterpillars overwinter in a tent of leaves, and the Dinghy Skipper is actually a caterpillar for up to 10 months, so it can be quite vulnerable to things going on its habitat in that time while it's in that state. So another type of bare ground creation that we tried in the Brecks was to use a machine, an excavator, a 360 excavator, and these 2 slides here show the impact that had on a very grassy ride. So probably about a quarter of that ride was stripped right down to the bare soil. A bank was created where all that yellow mignonette is flowering, and bird's foot trefoil soon established on the bare chalk there. And Dinghy Skipper colonised 5 years after disturbance. Dinghy Skipper would probably never have coped, would not have coped with this thicker, longer grass. Other things do though, so it's a matter of creating, if you like, a mosaic. So you've got longer grass for some birds, insects, plants, and then you've got an area of bare ground and shorter habitat for a whole host of other creatures, which really works quite well. That's another view of the previous ride with you can see the disturbed habitat. Dinghy Skipper loves to roost, so there it is on a knapweed head. So it really does like its habitat to be a mixture of long and short vegetation. So when it's flying in May and June, there are taller bits of previous year's seed head to rest on. So I've just put a few images in here of some of the big kit that was used to create some of this bare ground in the past. All sorts of different techniques were tried. This image is here at Greenwich Camp, and 2010 I think we did these. We created some little patches in that ditch, and also a huge big turf strip plot in the middle of Greenwich Camp with help from Forestry England, Plant Life, and funding from Wren Landfill, and lots of advice and help from Natural England as well. And these plots that were created 10 years ago are still good. They're still good for lunar yellow underwing. Dinghy Skipper loves it in the bottom of these ditches where bird's foot trefoil grows up. And these little sunny terraces in the other picture have also supported the butterfly. So it is one option to consider to start the succession going again, to get the big machinery in. That's another picture of it. This little sequence of pictures here shows the impact of rotating. The tractor here had something on the front that would mow vegetation and something on the back that would rotate. So he was able to create this strip on Maids Cross Hill. And in year 1, we got this type of vegetation with various plants and sort of quite a bit of bare ground. And then in year 2, we had a complete sea of Viper's bugloss. No seeding was done here. This was just what was in the seed bed. And now you wouldn't know we'd been there because it's back to what it was like before. So it just shows what can happen in the Brecks. If you do a bit of disturbance, you can get a real flush of a very different kind of vegetation, which is great for some of our Breckland species. But after a while, it will just go back to what it was before. And to keep it going, you have to start the cycle all over again. And, you know, it can be really stunning. This is Greenwich Heath in the Brecks, and the show at Viper's bugloss is just fabulous, and it creates, you can hear the bees from some distance before you get to some of these ride edges. So the abundance of nectar is really, really important for lots of Breckland butterflies and moths, and the forester moth in particular. So here's this little green moth, flies in the day. It's flying now. They were out last week when I was in the Brecks, so that's something, you know, you can find now. They love the sunny weather, and but they also can be found in cloudy conditions as well. As long as it's dry, they can be found when it's cloudy. And they can be found on a whole host of different flowers. So here they are on thistle, on a knapweed, hawkweed. They love Viper's bugloss. That's one of their favourites. They like field scabious. They like yarrow. So there's a whole host of different flowers that they like. So that's the first thing for the forester moth, I think, a real abundance of flowers. And all the sites they do well on do have that. And an abundance of flowers, obviously, in July and August when they're on the wing. So the forester moth caterpillar feeds on common or sheep's sorrel, and which you can see in this image of a huge ride in King's Forest, and it overwinters as a part-grown larva, July to May. In the Brecks, we've only got one forester, so we're quite lucky. We don't have to worry about the other two foresters that exist, the scarce forester or the sisters forester, because they don't occur in the Brecks. So if you find this green moth, it is the forester. So in terms of, they still like quite a short vegetation. So you can see the two images here. These are quite short, short flower-rich meadows, rides, and this is what they do prefer. This is where they're most numerous. Grayling is the last species on the list. The grayling is a butterfly that can be found across the UK, and it can be found essentially in coastal areas in quite good numbers. But inland is a different story, and we've seen in recent years a big decline of grayling on inland sites. and that includes the Brecks. The Brecks have seen a big decline in numbers there. And it's often associated with sites that have lunar yellow underwing. It's an adult July to September, so we'll start to see them soon. And they overwinter as a caterpillar on fine grasses, and the eggs are laid on bare ground. So you can start to see the similarity with habitat for lunar yellow underwing, which is what the grayling likes. Master of camouflage, if it's sat on the bare ground like this, you've not got a hope of seeing it. You'll only see it when you almost tread on it and it flies up in the air. You could confuse it with a meadow brown. So if you're out looking for grayling, the first thing is to get to know your meadow browns. And then you'll know it's something different. It's a larger butterfly, and it's got what I would call a sort of a low sort of looping, slow flight. It also likes to nectar. So here it is at field scabious, and this is a site where we found lots last year. You might recognise the image. It's the same one as where we found the lunar yellow underwing. So these sites, when they're working, when they look like this, they can work for a whole host of our species. The bottom slide shows the egg. The grayling chooses to lay the egg completely on bare ground, so you can just see how important that is for this butterfly. The egg, I haven't got a pointer, or have I? Oh well, no. So it's in the middle, it's a tiny little white blob in the middle of that bottom picture. That's the egg, completely bare. But what will happen is, by the time the caterpillar is hatched, there will be little tufts of little tufts of grass in that bare strip of land, which is ideal for the caterpillar to feed on over the winter. So this is my last slide. So in summary, we need to avoid a static approach to management for Breckland butterflies and moths, and we need to ensure that bare ground is part of the mosaic. So it's part of the habitat that you're managing for these species. And by studying the life cycle of target species, that can help us devise a management plan that works. And if it works for these particular species, which, if you like, are relatively well known, and we know how to survey for them, we know how to monitor their presence, then that can help sort of devise a management plan, and of course benefit a whole host of other Breckland specialist species that we know are also on those sites. So that's it from me. Thank you, and I hope to be able to answer any questions that you may have.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sharon. I'm just going to close this one down now. As Sharon said, if you do have any questions, please do let us know. I can see there's a few in the chat box already, so I will start reading through those now. And thank you to those of you also on the call that have been asking others questions already. I can see that. So bear with me 1 second. David's asked, is there any chance, oh sorry, it's moving as I go, people are messaging. Is there any chance Viper's bugloss moth could still be out there somewhere?
Oh, I don't think so. I think the moth recorders had a very, very good look for that when the numbers first started to go, went missing. There are some large military bases in the Brecks where, of course, there is no access, and there is just a very remote chance, perhaps. But you tend to think that someone would have caught one by now.
Yeah.
So I would say probably, almost certainly not. But never say never.
It might be hiding somewhere. Oh, Peter was asking, does the grey carpet moth get its name from being blamed for eating textiles?
No, I don't think so. I think that's from its colour. It really is a very sort of silvery grey moth. So it's an unfortunate name for a really attractive moth.
Thank you. Stephen was asking, when you talked about species found only in the Brecklands, are they endemic to the UK or are they found on the continent?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I think I'll have to pass on that one, I'm afraid. I'd have to look that one up. I think the Baseltime Casebearer is found on the continent. Grey carpet probably is. I'd have to look it up to be absolutely certain on that one. So
those 72 species that were listed as being endemic to the Brecks was kind of a combination. So some of them are found on the continent. There's a handful of them that the only place on Earth that they're found is the Brecks. But yeah, the majority it's endemic to the Brecks in England or in the UK.
Well, thank you. Got a question from Vanessa asking, have you been involved in any translocations or reintroductions in the area?
In the Brecks, no. I haven't been involved. No, we haven't done any anything like that in butterflies or moths. No.
No problem. Peter is asking, to plant Baseltime to support the Baseltime Casebearer?
No, I don't think we need to plant it. I think it if we undertake the right management, it does occur. It does just pop up. It does occur. So I'm not inclined to suggest we plant it.
Yeah. Neil is asking, would these species have evolved alongside wild boar to provide the open ground prior to modern agriculture?
Gosh, I don't know. Is there any history of wild boar in the Brecks? I don't know. I don't know about that one. I mean, we know that the disturbance in the Brecks was from overgrazing and then wind blow of sand. We know it's obviously from rabbits. It's hard to imagine the intensity of rabbit grazing previously. And I think also the changes in climate also would have meant that the Brecks was much more windswept and more bare in days gone by. But as for boar, good question. I don't know the answer to that one.
Annie is saying she's heard of sites installing butterfly banks, which are mounds of bare earth. Do these serve a similar purpose to the flat rotivated ground in your project area? And
yes, we have got butterfly banks across the rest of the UK in different situations, and they can be great for things like for butterflies like small blue, if they're chalky banks, if they're chalky banks, or on brownfield sites, they can be great. They just add that opportunity for different plants to thrive on bare ground, and then they also create the opportunity for caterpillars to thrive. They need that extra degree of heat. So yeah, butterfly banks, there are many different examples across the UK.
Thank you. Chris was asking, are the species you mentioned being affected by climate change?
Oh, I would imagine so, yes, because I think nitrogen deposition, the milder winters, the rapid growth of grass in the spring, which we didn't used to get. So yes, almost certainly. Yeah.
Thank you. Wendy's asking, what is a Grayling Caterpillar like and where would you find it?
Okay, so the Grayling Caterpillar is one that overwinters. So from September right round till April, it's a caterpillar at different stages. So they have what they call instars. So the first insides are really minuscule, really hard to identify. When they get mature and they're big, then it's easier to recognise, and you can look at the caterpillar book and see some images of what the mature caterpillar looks like. But they're out at night, so in order to find them, they feed at night, so you need to go out with a torch to find them. You're not going to find them in the day.
Okay, thank you. And Stephen was asking, these species found in the Brecks, I don't suppose there's any evidence for or against them being present when Grimes' graves were dug, for instance.
So that again, which one?
It was a bit of a long one. No. Stephen is basically asking, how long have these species been found in the Brecks?
Cool. Well, gosh, I'm trying to think. Our records. I mean, there are museum records on the Norfolk Moths website. The recorder there has listed all the museum records on there, so you can look at those and see some of the earliest dates for recording these species. I think we have to rely on that. I don't think we've got anything going back much earlier than you know, that time of that sort of era to know.
Yeah, thank you. Annie was asking, so except for the grayling eggs, the bare ground importance is more to do with letting different species of plants thrive for caterpillar food plants.
Yes, essentially. Yeah, it's all part of the, I mean, clearly the very fact that the grayling likes to use the bare ground for camouflage, it's, you know, it's going to have an important part of its ecology, and then the fact that it chooses to lay its eggs there, and the caterpillar needs to develop on that kind of habitat, on that dry habitat where the little clumps of grass are surrounded by bare ground. It's difficult to explain, but in a thick grass sward, it's wet, it's damp, and obviously these caterpillars just do not thrive in those conditions. Dry, bare situations.
Yeah, thank you. Thomas is asking, how big are the adult lunar yellow underwings, and how big are the caterpillars as well?
Oh, so the adult lunar yellow is about sort of just under an inch, something like that, and the caterpillar, oh, see, that varies, you see, depending on which instar you're looking at. So it can go from a centimetre in December through to just over an inch by the time it gets to be full grown in March. So that's the sort of size I'm talking about. With the lunar yellow underwing, I ought to just mention there are other underwing moths. So the lunar yellow underwing is the specialist that I'm talking about, but there is the large, there's the broad-bordered, there's the lesser, and they're all in there. So things like the large yellow underwing you can catch in your garden. So getting to know, if you're thinking of looking for those type of moths, getting to know those common ones in your garden situation is great, so that when you then find a rare one in the Brecks, you know it's different.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Lawrence has asked, are the Brecks an entirely anthropogenic landscape?
Cool. Well, there's a lot of human history there. There's no doubt about it. From going back to Grimes' graves to sheep to the rabbit warrens, absolutely, yeah. But then going back even further, after the you've got windblown sand, and so there's a lot of human history going on there.
Yeah.
About it.
Annie is asking, does the bare ground benefit other invertebrates as well? For example, solitary ground nesting bees?
Indeed it does, yes, it did. And you can only, whenever you go to one of the sites, whenever I go looking for these moths, you see loads and loads of beetles, ants, tiny little bees, tiny little wasps, and everything that, you know, that goes with them. So yes, it's incredibly important. And of course the plants, the tiny little plants that thrive, can only grow on these bare ground sites. So, yes, they're incredibly important for lots and lots of things.
Thank you. Joe was just asking what caterpillar book you're using. What was the one you were holding up?
Say that again, which? The
What
caterpillar book?
The guide you're using, yeah.
The new one. So it's a field guide to caterpillars by Barry Henwood and Phil Sterling. It's Bloomsbury. It is fabulous. Everything you need to know really in there.
Great stuff, thank you.
Another thing I have to mention, because this is terribly useful as well, only quite recently, is that one, the atlas, the new atlas of Britain and Ireland's larger moths. It's really helpful to see how moths and how they're moving. They move, have new arrivals and moving north, moving east, moving west, all that kind of thing. Very interesting.
Brilliant, thank you for that. I think we've gone through all of the questions in the chat now. If there are any more, or if I've missed any, could you put them again? There we go, there's another one. Peter commented saying Erin Carl wrote the definitive caterpillar book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Okay, are there any, if there's no other questions, I think we'll wrap it up. I will keep an eye on the chat if anyone's about to post one. If not, I think that's it. So thank you very much for joining us today, Sharon.
That was a pleasure.
Thank you to everyone that's come along as well to listen to us today. Thanks. Nice to see lots of familiar faces and some new ones as well today. So thank you for coming. We've just posted lots of links to the various things Sharon mentioned in the chat now. I will send them all in a follow-up email too, so don't worry about copying and pasting them. And as I mentioned, we have recorded this today, so I'll send around the link to everyone as well if you want to re-watch this. Well, there's lots of people in the chat saying thank you, Sharon.
Oh.
So yeah, goodbye to everyone. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you soon.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Thomas.